we're on to the third pillar of IEL's work, which is pathways into the workforce, into careers, into life, into citizenship. I want to remind you before I introduce that panel that there are some resources in the back of the room. Sue Swenson mentioned our guideposts to success, which has been developed by the Institute as part of a project we've been doing now for a dozen years with the Department of Labor under the auspices of the National Collaborative for Workforce Development for Youth. Joan may talk a little bit more about that. We actually also are the operator of the DC Advocacy Partners Program in the District of Columbia. We graduated our third class, and I think we have at least one person here who's a DC Advocacy Partner. I want you to see that the Institute's leadership work is at multiple levels. Yes, we're concerned about the superintendents and the principals. We're also concerned about families. We're also concerned about advocates. As part of a the kind of comprehensive cross-boundary approach that we think is needed to grow the kinds of leaders we need. So to move to this conversation about disengaged and disconnected youth, I'm sorry that our colleague Curtis Richards had a long-standing commitment in Boston. Curtis is the other member of the IEL leadership team and runs our Center for Workforce Development. So he could not be here today, but our senior fellow, Joan Wills, who has created the Center for Workforce Development at IEL now almost 20 years ago, is with us to lead this session. So please welcome Joan Wills, who will introduce this panel.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to tell you much about these people, partly because I just met two of them over the phone a week ago. But you can read these interesting resumes. One of the things that as I looked at our resumes collectively, I think what you can think of us as is a panel focused on the oddball out organizations. Now, why did I say that? All of us in the room have been in one way or another engaged in trying to improve the education, the structure of schools. This is an unusual panel in that they come from the workforce development system, the community nonprofit organizations, but all engaged in trying to improve the learning opportunities and the learning engagement mechanisms for a really very large number of our youth in America. Folks at IEL know that I'm normally always busy editing what somebody else has written, and I realized that I had an opportunity and didn't focus enough, because the charge to this panel was to say, focus on young people are increasingly disengaged from society. What can leaders do to put disengaged and disconnected youth on the pathways to success? I would have to challenge the word increasingly, because I think it's been a long-term challenge in terms of disengagement for too many parts of our population. So I would have edited it to say, too many young people are disengaged. Now, why does that matter? I can recall believing that I was going to help fix the problems of poverty in the 1960s when I first went to work, thinking that within 5 years, the Economic Opportunity Act was going to, in fact, solve problems. Well, I, along with all the other people in the room, have learned that it's a little bit more difficult than that. We are charged today to think about the terms equity, and we're charged with the term to think about, so what does it mean to create different types of competent leaders? And that's what this panel is about, trying to think through what it is we can do that builds upon the other parts of the development system for youth in the United States, the ones that are not as well resourced in some ways, and what is it we need to do to think about how to build better community collaborative mechanisms across all of the different provider services in a community. In the list of the 10 what leaders need to do, for me, at least, I think what we're going to be talking about is number 9. Leaders listen actively and learn from everyone, from their peers, which was talked about this morning in the first panel, from people in their own field, and others. And in part, we're representing the others. I've been involved in lots of different activities, even trying to come up with common language. I can remember when at risk was the term of the day. We didn't like that. So then we started talking about vulnerable. What does that mean? Then we came up with the term, and I'm not putting anything negative about all this, it's just a part of our search. Then we came up with disconnected. These are all true. And then we came up with the term opportunity youth. And to me, I still don't particularly like the use of the term, but I am delighted and value the fact that people are now beginning to say opportunity for youth that are disconnected matter, and they matter as a part of public policy. So what we're going to do today in this session is to take a look at lessons and practices on the ground at the local level, from practices that have been tapped at the state level and at the federal level, and then practices particularly as it relates to youth that have been involved in the juvenile justice system. And they're going to talk very quickly about what it is they've done, what they think are the critical issues. Then we'll try to get something in perspective about what it is we need to do to think about improving leaders across the systems, and what do we mean by that, and what are the ingredients of that. So why don't we start at the local level?
All right, well, thank you, Joan. My name is Michael Gritton. I'm the executive director of KentuckianaWorks, which is a strange creature called a workforce investment board. And I told the folks at dinner last night that Louisville, I work for Mayor Greg Fisher in Louisville and the 6 counties around it, and we chose our name because we want to try to do labor market information and work at the regional level, and because Indiana is across the river. When we thought about a name, the only real other choice was IndyYuckyWorks, which doesn't really seem to work all that well. So you may not have heard of Kentuckiana, but we have. And I'm honored to be here and congratulate IEL on 50 years of great work, and look forward to being a partner in the future of that work. I just wanted to describe a couple of things about disconnected youth. So a workforce investment board gets Workforce Investment Act money to target young people. And we got a youth opportunity grant back at the beginning of the last decade and learned a lot about what it was like to work with kids in the empowerment zone. As that money went away, we tried to create programs for young people in Louisville and the regional counties that learned from that program. And it won't surprise you to find out that programs that work, at least in Louisville and I think around the country, that work for young people have to be youth-friendly. They have to connect those kids to a caring adult. You have to give them a chance to move academically as fast as they want to move when they're ready to move. So my Youth Career Center in Louisville is run for me by the adult education folks at Jefferson County Public Schools. I happen to have one of the best adult ed programs in the country in my neck of the woods. I'm no dummy, so I figured that out right away. I'm thrilled, just this year we received a grant, a sub-grant from IEL to do work with kids that are involved in the juvenile court system who are in that 16 to 21 year old category. And then we used the teachings from IEL to then go write our own grant and lucked into that grant from the Department of Labor as well. So in the next 3 years, we're going to be working with 500 kids who are involved in the court system, right, who are mostly 16 to 19, and trying to help turn their life around. And so we call the grant Right Turn and Right Turn 2. And we're doing the same exact thing with those kids. We're trying to connect them to a caring adult in the program. We're trying to give them a chance to move forward educationally as fast as we can. And Mayor Fisher is thrilled because he always talks about Louisville as having a compassion agenda along with our economic agenda. One of his goals is to make us the most compassionate city in the world. And so he's a big leader of our summer jobs program, which is another thing we do at the Workforce Investment Board. And he always describes our summer job program as if it has a mentoring component. And I have to kind of, we kind of sort of, but not really. I mean, we want employers to mentor kids, but it's not a mentoring program. But the awesome thing about this Right Turn grant is that we actually are now recruiting 500 mentors. One person to mentor each of those 500 court-involved youth. And, my city can't be much different than anybody else's. I've got churches and synagogues that are actively looking for ways to plug in. I've got African-American fraternities and sororities at University of Louisville. I've got other college groups. So, amazingly to us, there are lots of people that want to connect to these kids and try to guide them one by one. So, another thing just to mention, a lot of times people hear Workforce Investment Board and think those are the people that run the Workforce Investment Act program and that's all they do, and it's kind of sad and pathetic. And I have to say I'm often the spear catcher for WIBs at meetings I'm at, so believe me, I'm happy to do that. But we get money from 4 branches of the federal government. So we were the first workforce board in the country to run a college access center. And I know Ms. Nutter is here from Philly, and we're always jockeying with Philly to be number one. Graduate Philly, graduate Louisville, Hadassah's work, and Jenny Sparandero and other great stuff that's going on in Philadelphia. We were the first workforce board to run a college access center funded out of TRIO grants from the Department of Education. So we're in the game of helping people who are trying to go back to school. We're in the game of helping people get off welfare and get into a real job. We have a college access program that's working with kids in the Jefferson County Public Schools, trying to target them to graduate and move on. We're using the career centers to give people labor market information and help them move forward. One of the things I think we're going to spend time talking about this morning is I don't think there's as much of a mystery about what works for disconnected youth as there may have been 10 or 20 years ago, but I think what's something we're really going to have to confront is the political will to actually do what we know works.
Right.
And one of the things that worries me is I find myself in panels or at conferences where I feel like I'm either preaching to the choir or part of the choir, and I want to figure out how to get the choir to be bigger. That's the challenge that I think we face in this work. So.
Good. Brenda.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank IEL and say happy birthday, IEL, and hope you have 50 more. And I want to recognize Marty Blank and really thank him for his extraordinary leadership. That's right. Most recently, I was proud to be the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, and I was responsible for career and technical education, adult education, correctional education, so it's music to my ears to hear folks talk about the juvenile justice system, and overseeing community colleges. And I would tell everybody, Joan, that I had the best portfolio in all the Department of Education. And most of the audience would agree, because we're working with youth in school and out of school and low-skilled adults. And prior to coming to the Department of Education, I was the president of Dorcas Place, an adult and family learning center in Providence, Rhode Island. And we served, again, disconnected youth and low-skilled adults and helped prepare them for college and careers. And when I arrived at the department, that's what we all talked about, was preparing, preparing students for college and careers. And I said to my colleagues, really, we're really talking about college readiness. We're really not talking about career readiness. And if we want all of our folks to be able to fully participate in our economy, we have to strengthen our career education system as well. Excuse me, my throat is dry. And so we embarked on a plan to transform career and technical education and released a blueprint in 2012 that I'm very proud of to transform career and technical education. It was built on 4 core principles, and I think those principles are really important as we discuss a system to serve disconnected youth. We need to make sure that we have an education and workforce system that is aligned and integrated, and that we're preparing our students for the jobs that are going unfilled, the jobs of the future, and that are geared to the regional and local economies, so that we aren't really, we're preparing students to fill those jobs and preparing them to fill those well. And those sectors, high demand, high wage sectors, they're not to be determined by the educators alone, but in partnership with the economic development systems and the workforce systems and the local communities and the state communities. And it would not be dictated by the federal government. Second, we need to have good collaboration, strong partnerships across systems. And that's what I'm really thrilled that we're talking about today in this panel. It is really cross-boundary leadership development and really breaking down the silos. And so we need to make sure that we have articulated career pathways from secondary education, adult education, into post-secondary education, but also includes the employer community, again, so that we are preparing our students for the jobs that are going unfilled, jobs for the future. We need to have much stronger accountability systems, because we talked about equity this morning, and we're never going to close the equity gaps if we don't really design a system that is fair. You know, when I talk about career and technical education, people still think it's the old vocational system, the system that was for those kids who are not college material. It was a dumping ground. And there's still today, despite the fact that there are hundreds of high-quality career and technical education systems, there's still the stigma that career and technical education system is for those students and is not really a system that will prepare students for college and careers and good jobs. So if we have a stronger accountability system, we can really make sure that we're preparing students for those jobs, that they are getting jobs in the field that they were prepared for, that they're receiving the industry-recognized credentials and post-secondary certificates that will enable students to be successful, and that we're closing the equity gaps. Because unfortunately, when I traveled all around the country, I would still see examples of those dead-end tracks. I would still see examples of we were preparing students for jobs that no longer exist. And a system that serves disconnected youth and low-skilled adults well also has to focus on innovation, whether to close the equity gaps, and also to Michael's point, we have to accelerate student progress. We can't only be talking about remediation. We have to be talking about acceleration. So I think those are the 4 key components to any system that is preparing students for college and careers. And make no mistake about it, I'm not suggesting that we're not focusing on post-secondary education, because you know the research as well as I do. 2/3 of the jobs by 2018 are going to require some form of post-secondary education. But the system has to be rigorous, it has to be relevant, and in many cases it has to be hands-on, because that's how we re-engage those students who in fact have been disengaged. And I also want to point out to the work that we did in the department that focused on career pathways as the organizing framework. And that is a system that has multiple on and off stops for students as they acquire the credentials, the knowledge, the strong academic programs, the technical skills that are valued by employers, and the employability skills. But important, and so much a part of that, are support services, because our students very much need support at every transition point along the system. So I'm looking forward to a robust discussion and really believe in the power of a high-quality career and technical education system that prepares all students for college and careers.
Thank you. Good morning, still morning. So good morning, and I'm really excited to be invited to this event this morning because, in one part, because it's been almost 9 years since I've been actively and vigorously engaged in the workforce development system. I actually, when I left the National Youth Employment Coalition in 2005, past 9 years I've worked most heavily in juvenile justice system reform, although during that period have really tried, as I have for many years, to try to improve the bridges and the collaboration between the juvenile justice system and the workforce development system. Joan dated herself already when she talked about her work in the 60s. I'll date myself also and say that my career in this work began in the early 80s, in the latter years of the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. And since that time, I've been promoting access to education, workforce preparation for the most hard-to-serve youth, particularly youth who've been involved in the juvenile and criminal justice system, and youth who have low literacy skills. I would say that in terms of particularly around serving youth in the juvenile justice system, there has been some progress in the past 15 years, in large part due to the investments that have been made by the Department of Labor, particularly targeted towards this population, and some of the emerging attention to youth development that we're starting to see in the juvenile justice system. However, really since the federal workforce development programs, which they weren't called that back then, it was employment and training, became performance-driven under the Job Training Partnership Act in the early 80s, harder to serve youth have been underserved by many local workforce systems who have been concerned in large part about meeting federal performance measures. And I know Philadelphia has been an exception. Louisville, I hear also, but I think in many places I think those are more exceptions than the rule. When I was in New York City in the early 80s, many of you may have known Dorothy Stoneman, who founded Youth Build. Back when she was in New York at the East Harlem Block Nursery run, she actually advocated in the city for what she called the Coalition for 10 Million to get the city to come up with dollars to actually provide services for the kids who weren't accessing job training programs because of the imposition of the performance measures under JTPA. And so kids who read below 8th grade could not get into a city-funded JTPA or a federally funded JTPA program. So she advocated for the city to come up with its own dollars to serve that population that was being left out of the federally funded program, which was intended to serve that population. From that initial investment, Youth Build emerged from that investment. I ended up running one of the programs that was also funded under that initiative. And working with kids who read below 5th grade level. And I think not only has serving this population discouraged by the performance measures, but also the cost per participant guidelines that are often promulgated by the federal government also suggest that longer-term investments are not cost-effective, and therefore it encourages you to serve kids who can be served shorter term and get your outcomes quickly. When I left the National Youth Employment Coalition, I joined DC government to be the deputy director of the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services here, and we were in the mayor's office trying to come up with a plan for addressing the needs of some of the most risky kids in the community, kids who were already involved in some crime, were at risk of being shot or being victims or being shooters. And in the course of the conversation with community-based providers, folks who were on the streets working with the kids, they acknowledged that one of the biggest challenges was employment, and these kids were looking for jobs, didn't have jobs. So the deputy mayor said, well, why isn't the Department of Employment Service here? So they were invited to the next meeting to come and talk about, okay, how do we connect these kids to jobs? And they explained who these kids were, and they say, oh, this isn't for those kids. We aren't for those, we're not supposed to serve those kids. So while I was in DC, we actually went and got our own, we were trying to build a system to serve all kids, but that wasn't going to happen. So we actually went out and decided we had to build our own separate system for juvenile justice involved kids. So we got a federal grant from the Department of Labor, which allowed us to provide a range of workforce and educational services for the kids in our system, which in that program became the most popular services and supports that we provided to the kids, and became very popular with both the case managers and with the kids, and ended up being, after the federal grant ended up being much of the program was continued with local dollars out of the Department of, out of DYRS. We'd hoped that would result from continued partnerships with the other agencies in the city, but those kind of partnerships did not yet emerge. There was still that reluctance to work with this population. In my current capacity at the Casey Foundation, we're seeking to reduce reliance on youth prisons and out-of-home placements, and also to expand alternatives to incarceration for juvenile justice system involved youth, and working with states and localities across the country. We're also seeking to build the evidence that there are promising workforce and educational programs serving this population. If any of you work in juvenile justice, know that there's the real focus around evidence-based programming, but it's a really narrow set of programs that have been deemed evidence-based that really focus on more family engagement and involving families and cognitive development, not necessarily on skill development and on workforce and education. So we're starting to build some evidence that there are other kinds of approaches that address the fuller range of youth needs that are also important, particularly around education and workforce development. But the problem is most of these systems don't have the resources to really effectively provide this full range of support that these kids need, so they have to begin to think about how they partner with the workforce development and the educational systems to provide these services. And of course, there goes the challenge. How do those partnerships emerge? I think there was some mention, I'm not sure, about there has been some changes recently at the federal level. We did see the enactment of the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, which replaced the Workforce Investment Act. I think I was hopeful about WIA's implementation, that would result in more services and outreach for out-of-school, disconnected, and juvenile justice system-involved youth. That didn't happen to the extent that I would have hoped, but I'm hopeful once again that with this new act, we will see once again great opportunities for this population. First of all, the greater focus on serving disconnected youth, raising that percentage from 30% to 75% of the kids in the program, or the money that's spent in the program. There's a greater appreciation that's reflected in the Act for the need for longer-term services, which is a key element for serving more hard-to-serve populations. I would say there's more progressive and developmentally appropriate performance measures that will include progress measures and recognize relative gains made by participants so they can get credit for how much progress they've made, not whether or not they've achieved a certain milestone or that is required to get credit for a participant. But like I said, I think I'm hopeful that there will be opportunities will be advanced with this act. However, like I said, I've felt that way before. So I'm hopeful this will be the time.
I too have some hope. But one of the reasons I referenced earlier, the need for the other voices is because one of the things that we have clearly learned I will mention the guidepost for success that was put together by us in terms of trying to sort through some kind of youth development-driven system about what all youth need to first be successful in their life, within their families, and at work. The harsh reality is that all that we've been talking about on this panel to now is that we've not been very successful in terms of helping people prepare for the world of work, and there's a variety of reasons. And that is particularly true of very specific populations. And let me cite 3 of them that I think have a lot to do with how we need to think about how to even identify equities and inequities in systems. For example, we do know that disability youth are well overrepresented in the prison system and in the foster care system. Outrageously overrepresented. Just as there are problems in terms of statistics coming in the schools, it's also true that our other systems have disability youth in them as well as those that are poor and the opportunity youth, et cetera. So we need to understand how to use data better, and then how to think about how to build better coalitions between those systems. Now I want to ask in our short time, back to the panel, what is it you think could possibly happen, could be done at the community and state level to begin to encourage some, how do we remove the impediments to working across boundaries? What is it that we need to do to mitigate what we know in terms of like the performance measure issues that schools and organizations have? And how is it that we can begin to assure that we could come up with some recommendations, some metrics, some ideas about how to promote and ensure that the most vulnerable youth, in fact, receive the attention they need? Because by any count, whether we're just talking about school statistics or service statistics in any measurement, we do have a serious problem. So when we talk about equity, for me, I think we need to at least try to think through how do we think about it across systems, and that we have to understand deeply within those systems, and then how do we build it back up, and how do we have this all driven by the needs of youth themselves? Any one of you want to start first on those little simple questions?
All right, well, let me pick off a couple things that I know, and I'll ignore the things I don't, and hope Brenda and David can cover for me, all right? Let's talk about the performance thing for a minute. I mentioned KentuckianaWorks runs a youth career center in Louisville that's run by our adult ed folks. I'm very proud of that program. Since the Youth Opportunity Grant went away and we started that in 2005, we've now helped more than 1,000 kids get GEDs in that program, right? So we know that we can help them. But what we also know is that if all we had in that program was federal money, from the minute that young person comes to the door, we have to make a decision right then, am I willing to bet on your outcome or not? Because I get measured on the percentage of the kids I enroll in the federal program who are going to meet a certain performance goal, right? Luckily for me, I had a fantastic mayor at the time, Jerry Abramson, who many of you may have heard from, who's now the lieutenant governor of Kentucky, and I have a great mayor named Greg Fisher that I work with now, both of whom have committed city resources to that youth career center. So now when you come to the door, I may know that you're reading and doing math below the 6th grade level, which is the typical thing we see with disconnected youth in Louisville, but I don't have to turn you away. I turn you into a city kid, and you're in the mayor's program. And if and when I get you close enough that I think you may be able to help me with federal performance, then I may turn you into a federal kid, a WIA kid, right? But this way, I don't have to turn you away. But the simple truth is, if all I had was federal money, you would face the same pressure that I would, which is I've got to get more than half of these kids to earn a credential like the GED, and you would face the same pressure that I did and do. How am I going to get half of these kids that are reading and doing math below the 6th grade level to a GED, right? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to cream or skim or figure out who you think you can succeed with. Set up hurdles and barriers before I enroll them, all the tricks that people do on the ground. I mean, that's just the honest truth. But if you were in my situation, I'm not sure what else you would do. Now, I want to talk about metrics for a minute, too, because I think metrics have the potential to be a tremendous catalyst and a tremendous friend for us. So Sue, the woman who spoke from the Department of Education before us, was also talking about metrics and data and how they can be your friend. I think we're at a tremendous moment where if we can really demonstrate that we can make things happen in a way that we can measure and track and show business leaders and other people who are skeptical of government, I think that has the potential to change the conversation, right? So we all are living in a world, I mean, let me tell you, the world from Kentucky, right? Like, my dad is a former factory worker at Ford. I'm just a blue-collar kid from Louisville. My dad's in the Masons, right? And my dad lives in still a working-class part of Louisville, but it used to be Democratic, and now it's mostly Republican, right? And he goes to his Mason meetings, and almost every week he calls me and says, Let me tell you the latest thing they're telling me about Obama. Can you research this and tell me whether this is true or not? And he's got some preposterous, outlandish claim. I have no idea where it came from, no idea how to track it down, right? There is a massive organization, right, set of organizations in this country who are dedicated to the proposition that government is the problem. And they are looking for any specific example they can find of government people doing the wrong thing. And they megaphone that, right, through Fox News. They megaphone it through talk radio. They megaphone it in any way they can, right, to convince you as a normal citizen, I should not be paying these taxes. I knew all along this was not a good idea. There is no way that anybody in government can accomplish anything good. I'm just going to go back to my little room and think that I'm not going to have to do anything more. And I can't find the troops on the other side who are dedicated to the proposition of demonstrating when data shows that we know what works, here's how we know it works, and here's the data behind it, right? And my sense is that's why data has the potential to be a friend, because I think if we can create metrics across some of these systems and start to demonstrate we actually know what works for disconnected youth, I'm absolutely confident with this grant from IEL and the grant from the Department of Labor, I'm going to take many of these 500 kids that are court involved and turn their life around. We know how to do it. We know that the educational pathways, if they dropped out, can't stop with a GED. I've got to get them into an industry-recognized credential or to a community college program that's aligned with what my jobs are in my regional economy. We know how to do this stuff, right? But until we have a data tracking system that can demonstrate that we're doing it and that can meet whatever that test would be, and then until we organize some sort of counter-army that's prepared to tell that story over and over again, right, through mayors and through senators and through representatives who actually believe our collective action can make a difference, I don't know how I'm going to win, right? Just one other thing. The stimulus gave workforce board people like me money for the first time since WEA passed. So when WEA passed, one of the deals that got cut is summer jobs money went away. So most cities, including Louisville, got out of the summer jobs business. We didn't have a summer job program in Louisville for 15 years. When it turned out that the stimulus in 2009 was going to give workforce boards around the country money for summer jobs for the first time, right? The U.S. Conference of Mayors Workforce Development Council, which I happened to be the president of just for that year, put together a training session, and we pulled together folks from all around the country to learn how to run good summer job programs. And we relied on Los Angeles and Boston and Baltimore and Kansas City, 4 cities where they had not gotten out of the business, right? At the time, the Department of Labor was hoping we would be able to use that money to help 100,000 kids go to work, right? And it turns out, partly because of that organization and partly because of fantastic work all around the country, we helped 330,000 kids go to work in the summer of 2009, right? Everybody thought we were going to fail, and they were all waiting for the one story that they could find where somebody misused the money or they wasted it, waste, fraud, and abuse, all that kind of silliness, right? But when we succeeded, nobody knows. Nobody heard it loud enough. Now, I want to say Mayor Nutter's one of the people at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, when he was the head of it, who was chanting from the rooftops about summer jobs, right? So, but we've got to get more and more people to do that kind of stuff when it starts to work.
We all agree with the message.
So, I'm one of those folks who absolutely believes in strong government, and you wouldn't be surprised to know that. But we've got to have the effective partnerships. You're absolutely right. You've got to be able to work with folks who you don't agree with and really break down the silos. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is with data, but also with human interest stories, I think, are very important. And when I was at Dorcas Place, I had a very robust civics education program, and I brought every single elected official and key policymaker and key employer to talk to the youth and adults that we served, and for them to be able to tell their story. And I'll never forget the time we had elected a governor who was from the corporate community, and he had no idea how low the literacy and language levels were of the folks that we served. And so I had a student introduce the governor when he came to Dorcas Place. She was a high school graduate who was reading at the 4th grade level. And she told the governor the story that when she received her high school diploma, she knew she shouldn't accept it because she couldn't read or write. But they said, oh, no, you were a good student. You didn't cause any trouble. The diploma is yours. And of course, she went out and looked for a job, couldn't find a job. She found a job and then quickly got fired because she didn't have the skill levels. And he was astounded. He didn't know that there were high school graduates, never mind folks who didn't even have the certification or the high school diploma or equivalency who could not read or write. And so he became a huge champion. So it's also about partnership. It's about informing. It's about advocating. It's about forming really strong partnerships and really making sure folks understand. Because when you serve the hardest to serve, as David mentioned, it takes time. Results are very slow in coming. And it takes resources, and you have to really have an intensity and duration of the level of services that you offer folks. And we don't have the political will right now to do that. We want the quick fixes. We want a cream. We want to have the systems that show us or design the programs that show, oh, we're very successful. But we have been leaving thousands, hundreds of thousands of those. We have 36 million low-skilled adults in this nation. Who are not being served, who cannot fully participate in our economy because they don't have the education, they don't have the skills, and they certainly don't have the work skills. Though, what's surprising around those statistics, 62% of them are currently working, but they're not able to really go up on a career pathway and gain the employment that will provide their family sustaining wages. So I believe you have to have strong partnerships, you've got to be strong advocates, but we also have to provide incentives to really make sure that folks are serving our most vulnerable.
David?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I still am hopeful that with this, that there will be opportunities to kind of change the metrics and the policy at the federal level that will now enable some of these resources to more effectively serve this population. However, I do think in many states they have come up with creative ways to use state education dollars to support these programs that reach out and re-engage the disconnected population. So I think there's encouragement from some of those states where that has happened. But in terms of, I think we've talked about the needing to, aligning reporting and requirements and performance measures across federal programs will go a long way towards simplifying some of the barriers to kind of do this cross-system collaboration. Reducing the complexity that just is so complex to try to do that, it discourages folks from ever pursuing this kind. So allowing unified and consolidated plans would go a long way in that regard. But also, as mentioned, incentivizing the system, incentivizing co-funding of programs and services serving the hardest to serve population. So if communities were given incentivized that if you actually have pulled together resources, braided resources from different systems, that there's additional resources that you can tap into, or other ways to really incentivize that kind of collaboration, because it's not going to happen unless it's truly incentivized. And then being able to use your education dollars for the academic support, using the workforce dollars for your job preparation and your work experience, and then human service dollars to support the support services, a way to kind of braid those resources to enable the full range of supports to be in place, but tapping into those various funding streams.
Simple ideas. This turn now to you, and questions from the floor. Are there any? If not, we'll talk. Yes.
I'm Ron Huckstra. I'm a former Washington intern in education and a retired school superintendent, then a retired entrepreneur. If I can ask you a hypothetical question, assume a world where all things are possible. Secondly, assume a status in the United States that we have serious concerns about national security. If we were, as a nation, able to institute a national service requirement for all citizens from 16 to 22, 2 years of some form of service to the nation at the community, regional, state, national level. If that were possible, would it be a good idea, and if so, why, or not a good idea, and if so, why, in the context of the issues that you've been discussing?
Anybody want to give an opinion?
Keep going first if you all.
I'll take a stab at that one. I mean, there was hope that, Americorps, when it was launched, would be that kind of
I
opportunity.
knew who was going to answer it.
That it would be that kind of opportunity, that would be that type of alternative national service for young people. I've always been an advocate on engaging young people in service to their community. I feel it's part of them being valued, and to be part of a community means that the community, and that they should be not seen as assets, that they had a role to play and a responsibility to give back to their communities, and that was an important part of their own self-worth and their development, and that giving them those kind of roles would go a long way towards developing them. It also, and I remember when Americorps was launched, I was quite concerned the fact that under the previous act, a lot of the money went towards disconnected youth. Americorps actually shifted the deployment of resources away from that population. I remember they were saying 1/3 should be college grads, 1/3 should be in college, and 1/3 should be pre-college. Considering only half kids go to college, and a lot of kids aren't going to college, what did that mean about the kids who were dropouts, who weren't going to college? They weren't even on the equation. So there was only, so a lot of the community, so those kids almost got left out of that effort. But I always felt it was, and there was, the idea was around, AmeriCorps was around giving back, but the other part of it was building the skills of the individual. The Civilian Conservation Corps was about, it was about giving them employment, but also it was about them contributing, but also getting something in return, not just a wage, but skills. And I think it go a long way towards doing both, about giving them a chance to contribute and be valued, but also to gain skills that could enable them to enter the job market and be more productive citizens.
Another way to answer that is, I doubt that you would find probably anybody in the room that would disagree with the value added of service. And I personally would agree with your idea. The problem is, Bill Clinton in this past week, when he was talking about the things that he regret has not happened, and the first thing he mentioned, in fact, was the lack of growth of Americorps, which I found interesting, that it's not large enough. And part of it goes to what David's talking about. Our laws have become so bureaucratic in the law itself, and so they do percentages in the laws that starts driving things that we don't even yet know the answers to in terms of what's going to be the most effective. The laws of the 1930s were 4 pages long. The laws of today, I can't get through. So somehow we've got to figure out how it is we can prove that we don't need, as Sue talked about, the monitoring mentality, because it is dangerous, it is hurting us, it is hurting creative people throughout all of the different systems. But how do we build, again, the trust? And then how do we develop the competencies of leaders across these systems so that we can put some meat around the words trust, building relationships that leads to engagement? We can tell a lot of personal stories, but we have to go far beyond that. I'm sorry, I just had to say that. Other questions?
Hi there. My question had to do with your experience with programs that incorporate remediation or bringing students with low basic skills up to the high school standard or the associate standard within the framework of career and technical education. And so both inside the K-12 system and beyond it, what's been your experience with those kind of programs?
My experience is that there's not enough of those programs that really pay attention to high-quality academic coursework, because you must provide more intensive academic supports. So what I've seen across the country are there's some very excellent career and technical education programs that have that are very high rigorous standards, and what I'm worried about is that they're shutting out the middle students or the lower skilled students unless there's a targeted and deliberate and intentional focus on improving their academic skills. So we've got to make sure that, it was incredible to me. I went to one of the unbelievably high-quality career and technical education STEM programs, and there was a waiting list to get into the program. And I was very troubled by that because so many of the students who really could be served well by the system weren't able to participate. On the other hand, I've seen lottery programs for high-quality academic CTE programs that provide the very intensive academic support as they enter the program, and they've been successful. But a key strategy is really that you're not only doing the academic, but you have embedded and integrated the workforce programs. And so that it's a comprehensive approach. You've got to have the academics, you've got to have the high-quality career and technical education skills that are valued by an employer, and you've got to have the employability skills and wrap around that the support services. So there are very effective models out there. It takes a commitment, and it takes a real push to make sure that the academics are as rigorous as they are in regular academic programs so that they're very valued by the employer community.
I just want to add one thing on that. I think the importance is that the academic preparation and the workforce is concurrent. That you don't have to go through the remediation first to get the work readiness and the employment opportunities, because then you
That's,
lose,
by the way, an evidence-based practice.
because you lose the kids in that process. So it should be concurrent.
Yeah, I work with David. I remember those days of innovation. I'm sorry that you left, but you're on the other side, on the philanthropic side. And then Michael, I was on the Kentucky Technical Community College Foundation Board. So just two questions. One is, why isn't business at the table more around these type of programs? And I'll give you an example. I visited a couple Job Corps, and I went to Potomac Job Corps, and I saw one program that I thought was outstanding, was that Amtrak had partnered with Job Corps, and the students that finished that program automatically were eligible to work for Amtrak. And so there was a pipeline into Amtrak through Job Corps. And then when I was in Kentucky, I saw that the business and industry folks were driving the course work at the community colleges because they said these are the jobs that we need. Most of our young people that are in this quote-unquote high-risk environment have no idea what the business and what the demand is for jobs, and even take programs that actually are dead-end jobs. There aren't any jobs there. So I'm wondering if there could be a better connection, especially with high-risk youth, around what the jobs are, using that technology. I'm surprised there's no Monster.com and Career Builder for this population, because technology is now the way that you find jobs. So I'm wondering, is there any innovation either through Casey that they can bring up, or Michael, is there any way from a state like Kentucky that you can do innovation with technology and with the employers, so that young people know that if they finish, they got a job, and a living wage job?
Well, I do want to say a couple things. So workforce investment boards are designed to have a majority of business people and a business chair, and if I'm doing the job right, we're hearing from local business leaders what they need and trying to translate that back in partnership with the community college president and the superintendent of K through 12, et cetera. So hopefully we're doing that. I've been in the job 12 years now, and I'm starting to get a little bit of perspective with time. Our best friend in serving disconnected youth is a tight labor market, right? So those people who were in the business, who schooled me, who were doing the job in the 90s, said there's nothing better than a 5% unemployment rate, because employers start to open the door to people that when the unemployment rate is 10%, they're not that interested, right? I'm also realizing, again, I'm getting older. The thing we just went through in 2008 and 2009 was literally cataclysmic, I think, for almost every business leader in the country. And so I think for many years, they weren't hiring or weren't thinking very much about where their next people were coming from. They were just trying to survive. So let me just tell a little story about Louisville as the local guy. We're lucky. My dad worked at a Ford plant, and his brother, my Uncle Danny, worked at a General Electric plant. And we've been lucky in the last 5 years because both Ford and GE made major investments in Louisville, $500 million each or something like that, right? And we've added 11,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 3 years. But Chip Blankenship, who's the head of GE Appliance Park and a fantastic leader, has said publicly a couple of times, you know, when we went through the numbers to try to figure out whether we could start making new appliances at GE Appliance Park in Louisville and essentially repatriate jobs from places like China and Mexico, we were expert at all of the numbers we had to run about transportation costs and labor costs and all that sort of thing. But when we made the decision to bring those products back to Louisville, Chip Blankenship, never bothered to call the school superintendent to say that that was something they were going to be doing. He didn't call the community college to give them 6 months heads up, right? They just started to look for people and had this idea that the system over here that nobody had talked to, right, was going to have ready for them what they needed. Now, to his great credit, he's organizing a group of manufacturing employers, including Ford and Westport Axle and many others, who are now trying to send a more serious set of signals to the K-12 system and the community colleges and the workforce board about what they need, and then are expecting us to try to respond to that. I will say these kinds of systems are pretty decent at responding to that if employers are engaged in it, but I think there are often examples where their employers just aren't engaged or aren't sure how to connect. And even at the K-12 level, we're only now starting to organize career-themed high schools and trying to embed these industry-recognized credentials into K-12 programs. So we're only in the early stages of giving businesses a more direct connect to those kinds of systems. It's another step beyond that to try to figure out how to help disconnected youth connect and ultimately earn those kinds of credentials. So there's more work to do. But I'm encouraged that as the unemployment rate is going down and businesses are growing, the conversation has totally changed in the last 12 to 18 months from what it was before.
Yes, well, also you mentioned Casey. Although it's not part of our portfolio, the foundation is exploring demand-driven strategies targeting disconnected youth populations, to try to identify where are there examples of demand-driven efforts that are really targeting this particular hard-to-serve population. So we'll be hearing more about that in the coming months.
And I've gotten the high sign. I have one more comment about the question about the employers. Employers participate. What we don't have are a good network and system support, in fact, for the employers. One of the things that I anticipate happening as a result of the new legislation tied to career pathways, we're talking about tying some knots together that have never been tied together. That we will, because now they've changed the operating rules, that it'll be sector-driven and industry-driven. That was not the case in the old workforce development programs. So there are pieces, lots of little threads. The question is, how do we pull those needles together through the different eyes of different needles, in turn braid it together so that we've got a better system than we had in the past? Marty.
Thank you, Joan, David, Michael, Brenda. I'm really smiling today because, you know, many organizations are doing seminars in Washington. And when I observe what's coming, and we do some of this ourselves, it's about this thing you can do, this program, this practice, this strategy, and this is the answer. And I hope what we've done today is something different, is to challenge your thinking, to open your minds to different perspectives. We didn't have all of them in the room, I realize that. But this is the kind of thing that the Institute has always done, is to convene people to think about challenging questions, whether it was in the early days of the Washington Internships in Education program or the Education Policy Fellowship program, which just kicked off its 51st year here in Washington with 23 fellows. And if any of you want to participate in that program or want to have your staff participate, Helen Malone, who put this event together, is now running that program. And I want to thank Helen, by the way, for her extraordinary work in getting this done, along with Jen Matsutani, who's a brand new staff member, who joined me in thanking Helen. And finally, as I was listening to all the panels today, I smiled for another reason, and that is that out of our networks, we grew the 10 lessons, the 10 leadership lessons that are in the back of your program and that you'll find on our website. And the more I listened, the better I felt about what we said. Because I think there's a lot of wisdom that we gathered from our community, to use the language of G2 Brown this morning. A community that really represented people who see themselves as working at the grassroots level, and people who work in the policy environment, people who are administrators. We brought together all of that experience. And those lessons I hope you will look at, I hope you will think about, I hope you will share, so that we can all go forward together to achieve the kind of equity and excellence that our children deserve and that is so important to our entire society. Thank you much for coming and joining us. All of this will be, the video will be available shortly. We'll be doing some blogging about this. So please help us to share these ideas and this thinking across your very many networks. Thanks so much. Take good care. We'll see you next year.